Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and each episode my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the fifth stop at 2020's Season 2, Episode 9, Try, starting at 25 minutes and 30 seconds with a morning montage and ending at 25 minutes and 49 seconds with the truck crashing with Mark in voiceover saying, "You practice and practice." Here with me once again is Jason Soto from Whatever with Jason Soto. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. So we get another loop here with the second part of the montage with things going wrong.
Yes. I never seem to cover montages where things go right. I seem to be getting all the ones where terrible things are happening. I don't know if that's a personal choice on my part or what.
Yeah, I don't know. So in this one, he makes the truck crash this time.
Yes,
and
yes.
We get to see a little bit of the. This is the only out of the three times where we get to see the hula girl on the dashboard.
Oh. Okay, yes. All right. I didn't notice that myself, but okay, cool.
Yeah, that's what you get. That's what I get whenever I watch these short clips over and over again, just trying to find little things in here.
Okay, I like it.
And it's like an escalation. The first time he got there too early, and this time, he made things worse.
Yeah.
And he makes the truck crash. And then he gets in trouble.
Yeah.
And the rest of his day is going to be not very good.
No, he basically ruined it because she gets mad at him for causing the truck to crash and leaves. I got a theory. I got a question for you. Sorry to interrupt you and everything, but do you think like when it goes wrong like this, does he just like kill himself and just restart it over again? Or does he just waste the day through and then just wait until he goes to sleep?
Yeah, I did notice that he did add in the fact whenever he starts telling Claudia about him being trapped in the time loop, that he says that the day starts over for him anytime he goes to sleep or anytime he dies.
Yes.
So if we do know that he has died at least once.
At least. I would say probably more than once if I'm going to be brutally honest. But yeah, I would say that, yeah. I always, now when he said that, because I wasn't too deep into the thought, it took me, the rest of the day to think about it. But when the instant he said that, I'm like, what could have caused his death? He's doing all this just to date this girl. What like terrible thing went wrong where he died? Like, did he get like bold and they were like trying to make out and then it was like a lightning storm happened? He got electrocuted? Did he get shot by the guard? Like, I wonder what terrible thing went wrong where he discovered he can die and then he comes back the next day, quote unquote next day. You know what I mean? What during this whole process that we see happen, he gets killed. So I have to wonder. That's what made me think of that question. It's like it has to be he messed up so badly and he just wants to try again, so he just kills himself and then he wakes up.
I get the impression that it follows that his journey that we don't see follows a somewhat similar structure to Groundhog Day. And I think that this is him in his it's not really his third act yet, but because it implies that he may be trapped in this time loop potentially forever, because it's likely that he's never going to get the point to become a better person.
Yeah, exactly.
He's just doing various other things. But I think it's entirely possible that he's already past the suicidal depression point of his trapped in a time loop. And
Okay.
I think that it started in some other way, and he's, gone about various other tasks, and then it's not until, maybe he's 400 days in whenever he first sees Claudia. And so he
Okay.
spent I don't think that he spent the entire 1,000 days pursuing Claudia. I think he noticed her somewhere after a few hundred days, and then he spent several hundred days trying to perfect this date. And then at the end of this, he goes, I get the feeling that he goes on and starts to go off and do something else, maybe pursue some other woman, or do some other thing to pass the time, to pass his own eternity.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah. I get that feeling too. Like kind of towards the end when he just watches her not get hit by a truck and he just kind of smirks and then sort of just walks away. Yeah, he's probably gonna go mess with some other woman.
Yeah,
Possibly.
and I take the way I took that smirk was like, huh, she actually wouldn't have gotten hit by that truck after all.
Yep. Good job, dude. Good job.
And we mentioned that the book is different, and the book title, it was very difficult for me to read, but I'm pretty sure that it's titled The Conspecifics.
Ah.
And what that and of course all these book titles are not real books.
Okay.
They're just fake titles, just made up for this show. But the conspecifics is a concept in biology. It basically just means of the same species.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And so I get the feeling that that's and I believe that the way it's used in the context of biology is that different creatures are more likely to interact with members of the same species, or conspecifics,
Okay.
rather than interacting with members of other species. And so
Okay.
this is like him, he's trying to. I get the feeling that the symbolism for that is it's him trying to seek out people who are the same as him. Like he thinks that he and her are a perfect match,
Yes.
that they are like exactly the same. Even though, we've, like we talked about in the last episode, he's really changing or exaggerating a lot of aspects of himself to make her think that they're the same, even though they're not as much the same.
Yeah, or since she's super smart and super into like scientific stuff, maybe he's just trying to, bone up on all this smart knowledge things and to impress her. It could be that too.
Yeah, that could be. Which it almost makes me surprised that it's not something about like masks,
Yeah.
or something like related to her field of study.
Well, maybe it started off that way, like the first time he was kind of chasing after her and he discovered what she was there at the museum for. And maybe he read through all of that like however many times, and then he's like, okay, there's no need for me to read this book anymore, so I'll read this other smart book to see if I can add this to the conversation on top of the mask stuff.
Yeah, possibly.
Yep.
And then like that, we mentioned his wardrobe last time, and this time he is wearing glasses,
Mm-hmm.
and his jacket is zipped all the way up, but he's not wearing the beanie.
No. But he had an umbrella, didn't he? He had an umbrella all 3 times?
Yeah, he had the same umbrella,
Okay.
and
Yeah, so he had the umbrella.
and I
Okay.
think there's a little bit of symbolism to that too, but I'm gonna save that for the next episode.
Sure.
So, in the last episode I asked you what you thought about this, this episode in general, and you talked a little bit um, about your history with the Twilight Zone. Do you remember the first time that you saw the Twilight Zone, and which version it was?
So yeah, sure. It was definitely the original run back in the 60s.
Oh, I
I
didn't know
don't.
you were that old.
Yes, I am. I am 78 years old. No. I meant to say that's the version that I watched. Sorry, that came out really weird. No. But I don't know how well known this is or not, but every New Year's Day, the Sci-Fi Channel would have a Twilight Zone marathon. It was more in the 90s they did it. I don't know if they still do. I know I hear about it every now and then in recent years. But it was like a huge thing back in the 90s. And, I was in high school, in the 90s. And so I would be off New Year's Day, and I would most likely be at my dad's house at this time, and I'd have nothing going on. I'm just chilling at my dad's house. And so I would spend the entire New Year's Day watching all these Twilight Zones. So that was sort of, my introduction to it. Now, as to what the first episode was, oh man, I want to say, God, what the hell could it have been? I kind of want to feel. I feel like the first one I ever watched, and I was like, "Huh, this is interesting." Was the one where it was this like lady, like an older lady in her house by herself, and she kept like hearing things like on her roof, and she didn't know what it was, and most of the episode was kind of quiet. There was hardly any dialogue, any noise. It was just her in this house. And then the twist ended up being that she was an alien on a planet, and the noise she was hearing was astronauts landing on her house.
Huh.
And that was what the twist was. I can't remember what it was called. I don't remember what it was called. But it was mainly just this lady and in her house, and she just kept trying to investigate what this noise was, and she would see weird things, and yeah. And then that was the first one that I saw, and then I was like, oh, this is a neat premise, and then I was shocked to find out it wasn't a silent TV show when there was actual dialogue and stuff later on. But yeah. But yeah, I loved the original run. Like there's a lot of great episodes, and then there's a few not so great ones that I'm not a fan of.
There is like literally over 100 episodes.
Yes.
Over the
like
course of
five or six seasons. Yeah.
Yeah, 5 seasons.
So, and they all can't be winners. So.
Yeah. Yeah, like, do you remember? Because I know you mentioned the 80s
Mhm.
season. Like, do you remember how you discovered that one? Like
Yes.
was that also included? And I doubt that was included in the marathon, right?
No, it wasn't. It was actually I actually watched it when it was like airing for the first time. I remember I was like 8 or 9 or something, like around that age. I don't know, maybe 10. And they
Well,
were
it came out in '85, so you would have been 5
I
when
thought
it
it
first
was
came.
older.
But it,
Was there a third reboot? 'Cause I remember being older than that.
but it went on for like 3 years. So I think 2 or 3
Oh, okay.
years.
Well,
So
then
you might
maybe
have caught it towards the end.
I might, yeah. So okay, maybe I can't place what year it was, but yeah, I remember just catching it as it was airing, like it was like now new episode of the Twilight Zone show. And I remember the episode very clearly what it was, because it was a very strange premise. Because it involved time travel. And I've been a time travel nerd my entire life, and so when this aired, I was like ecstatic. It was about this guy who was a big Elvis fan, and some reason, I don't remember how exactly, he ends up going back in time, and he meets Elvis before he's famous, and so he's hanging around with pre-famous Elvis, and then he accidentally kills Elvis. And so he like hides the body, and then he assumes the persona of Elvis. He just becomes Elvis because he has all this future knowledge of Elvis. So he knows the songs and he knows what he does and all this stuff. So he just becomes Elvis. And that was what the whole plot of the episode was just him kind of, in a way, it might fit for the show because it's kind of a loop, because he ends up meeting himself, as a kid or something, kind of like the 12 Monkeys type thing, if you want to call that a time loop. And then that's kind of where it loops from there. So it was very interesting. And again, I don't remember what that was called either, but yeah.
That kind of reminds me that there was a movie that came out just a few years ago that it was like in a world, like in a alternate reality where the Beatles never existed, but this one guy had the entire memory of Yesterday, and this guy has all the memory of all the Beatles songs, and so he basically becomes the Beatles.
It kind of was like that. Yeah, absolutely. Except this guy kills Elvis and then becomes him.
Yeah, he talented Mr. Ripley is him.
Yeah, basically. He basically does, yeah.
All right, so the episode, the classic episode that I wanted to talk about for this one is actually because I don't know if you noticed, but the moving truck, it's actually it's Dingle moving truck.
Oh,
like
you know
Dingle
what? Now you say
company.
that. Yeah, you're right.
And of course that's named after the episode Mr. Dingle the Strong.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually an episode that I remember seeing before, and it's one of the more comic episodes. It's pretty funny, and it has Don Rickles is in it. He plays this basically antagonistic gambler who, he's always fighting with the bookie because the umpire made a bad call, so it doesn't count. And he tries to argue with Mr. Dingle, who's this meek, stuttering vacuum cleaner salesman, to agree with him. And then whenever Mr. Dingle doesn't agree with him, he punches him.
Yeah.
And there's this two-headed Martian that is also invisible, that does an experiment on Mr. Dingle and gives him superhuman strength just to see what would happen. Yes. And so the rest of the episode is basically Mr. Dingle finding out that he has super strength, and then starts to become this famous superstar. It's like, oh my god, he's incredibly strong, and like he attracts news stations, and he becomes this sensation, and so he goes around like practicing his feats of strength, and then the Martians come back and it's like, well, he's just using it to get famous, we're going to take it back. And then they take it back and he becomes a laughing stock again. And then it ends with two Venusians who are basically like two little kids who speak with it's kid actors playing the Venusians, but it's adult actors doing their voices. Like really deep voices.
Yeah, I remember that. That's right. Yeah.
And they meet up with the two-headed Martian, and they're like, we're looking for somebody to experiment on. And the Martian's like, well, how about Mr. Dingle? He's this, pathetic little, he should be fun. And so the whole episode, I mean, it's incredibly silly and ridiculous, but it's funny, and I enjoyed watching that one as well. It's a silly bit of fun, and it's nice seeing Don Rickles young but still looking old.
Indeed, yes. Now, here's what was interesting. If you look up all these old episodes of Twilight Zone on Wikipedia, they give you in the article both the opening narration and the closing narration. So that could be like a fun thing for people if they want to check that out.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and what's even more fascinating, because for the opening and closing music, I pulled out clips of Rod Serling's narration,
Mm.
and mixed in with the music that Lackey provided, and he never once in any of the 140 some episodes does he ever say the word trapped
Oh.
in any of those narrations, because I was like desperately trying to find, even him just saying like trapped, so I could, intercut it with him saying just in the Twilight Zone, so I could get, the title of this podcast of Rod Serling saying trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
But it never happens, and that
Huh.
blows my mind that he never once says the word trapped in those narrations. It's possible that he says it, somewhere in some other episode or possibly in Night Gallery, but I couldn't find it anywhere.
Okay. Wow, that is interesting. Very, very interesting.
But that's we've kind of gone away from the episode, but that's fine. That tends to happen with these montages. But
Indeed.
was there anything else that you wanted to say about this one with the the crashing moving truck?
No, I think we covered everything.
All right. Well, once again, why don't you go ahead and remind everybody where they can find you online?
Yeah, sure. So I do a whole bunch of podcasts, and you can just find all those over at rabbitholepodcast.com. You mentioned Lackey. I do a podcast with Lackey about Doctor Who called From Inner Time. You can find that on Rabbit Hole Podcast. I do a comedy show. I do a horror movie show. I got a board game one. There's a whole bunch. You can just go check them out over there, rabbitholepodcast.com.
And as always, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can find me on Twitter at Bubbawheat. You can find this podcast, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else where you listen to podcasts. And I also have a Patreon. If you want to join, you can listen to episodes of this podcast early. You can also join in voting on my Flight Sites and Movie Nights site to help decide what I review on that site each month. And that can be found at patreon.com/flightstitesandmovienights. And until next time, I will still be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
But you practice. What the hell's wrong with you? And you practice.